On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to talk about knowledge, forbidden knowledge. Gary Stearman has written another article on time travelers of the Bible where he discusses the dimension of God, and he calls it heaven, knowing up from down.
Heaven. You know, JR, everybody, I think without exception, wants to go to heaven. Some want to go on their own terms, saying, I did it my way. Others, well, we know the true way to get to heaven, and that's through Christ. And by the way, he says it's the only way. But there are men laboring in the halls of science, physicists working with exotic equipment, JR, who are trying to probe into what they call a higher dimension to obtain the knowledge that it is to be found there. And the Bible specifically refers to this as forbidden. And it does it right from the very beginning because the serpent came to the woman. And in Genesis 3:6, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desired to make one wise, and there it is, to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, did eat, and gave also to her husband with her, and he did eat. Well, we all know this story. God had forbidden this, as it's called, a fruit. Satan came along and said, did God forbid that? Oh, no, he didn't forbid that. Go ahead and try it, because it'll open your eyes and it'll make you like gods. And JR, I believe this is the fundamental divergence in the history of mankind. There are those, we call them the household of faith, who seek the knowledge of God legitimately. There are those of another household who seek knowledge illegitimately.
Now, Gary, you talked about the forbidden fruit making one wise. Wisdom is something that the human race has strived for. I recall reading Solomon, you know, the wisest man who ever lived. And he had so many philosophical things to say that were beyond the pale of just the physical. Had to do with a mental state, how a person reacts to other people, the choices between right and wrong, good and evil, as you put it here, knowing up from down.
Knowing up from down.
Yes. Now, this idea of a fruit or some kind of drug, shall we say, hallucinatory or whatever, that would cause man to be able to pierce that veil that covers us. Is there not a veil, Gary, that God has placed over the mind of man so that we cannot understand things beyond a certain level of knowledge? Exactly.
And, you know, JR, I believe that's the heart of faith. Faith is believing without ever having seen, simply because you believe that God has said it and that's enough for you. The faithless wants to see with his own eyes. And there are examples of such faithless people. They're called wizards, they're called shamans, they're called necromancers, astrologers, they're called soothsayers. In the Middle Ages, they were called alchemists. You know, they wanted to turn lead into gold. They are the mystics, the parapsychologists, they are the trance mediums. There are people who claim to be able to work signs and wonders in various countries in the East. JR, these are the people who are tampering with that forbidden knowledge.
Now, there is a knowledge. There is a knowledge that is forbidden.
Yes.
Can you in some way describe for us what might be involved in this knowledge?
Well, JR, the physicist today is talking about something called the strong nuclear force, which he says it's the most powerful force in the universe. And if you could actually isolate it and learn to manipulate it, so say the physicists, you could literally create something out of nothing. You could turn on a machine and create a block of gold right in front of your eyes, or whatever else you wanted to create, with no penalty of any kind. In other words, with just the slight expenditure of energy, you could create matter. So they say, and they are trying to get their hands on that strong nuclear force which I believe the Bible describes in Hebrews 1:3, where it speaks of the Creator, Christ, upholding all things by the word of his power. In other words, holding matter together, holding time, space, energy, matter, and motion together, all by the word of his power. That's what the physicists refer to as the strong nuclear force.
So basically, if a scientist can tap into the strong nuclear force, they can find a way by which we in this physical realm can live forever?
Yes, that would be part of the spin-offs. In other words, you could synthesize anything your mind could imagine. Now, that sounds good until you think about the horrific possibilities of a despotic power getting a hold of this kind of knowledge. That's sort of Antichrist stuff, you know?
Now, Gary, after this life is over and after history has run its course and heaven comes down in the form of the holy city, New Jerusalem, we will know as we are known.
Absolutely.
Is that right? We will have that knowledge, but it will not be forbidden at that time.
Right. Nor will we have achieved it by illegal means.
So what makes it forbidden today?
What makes it forbidden today is that if men were able to obtain it and use it, they would use it for all kinds of sinful, selfish, greedy purposes. And they would use it to control other men in dictatorial fashion. In other words, they would misuse the power.
Now, Satan came to Eve and he said, you can have this forbidden knowledge. Just partake of this fruit that is able to open your eyes. I think that referred to the mental capacity, don't you? And to make you wise. So wisdom beyond men's normal ability to be wise. Is that what we're looking at?
Exactly.
The force.
The force.
The force.
to use the terms that are used in Star Wars, the Force. Luke used the Force. What is the Force? Well, it's that transdimensional, what is it? Power. That if you learn to concentrate in a particular way, you can use that power. JR, that's illegal. The Bible terms that as illegal.
Yes. Now you may recall that when God spoke to Moses, Moses wanted some form of this power. He wanted to see God. And
yes.
God said, if you attempted it, you couldn't live. So there is a force or another world or a transdimensional reality, whatever we want to call it. If man were to have the ability to go there, he might not be able to survive this thing. Let's talk about the angels who came down and tried to impart some of this knowledge to early men. What happened?
Well, in Genesis 6, the sons of God came to the daughters of men, and they set up little areas of control. They set up kingdoms, if you will, on earth. And they brought illicit knowledge down from heaven to earth. As Peter and Jude speak of it in their epistles, they left their first domain, they came down, they brought illegitimate knowledge to man. They brought some knowledge which we might call legitimate, the metallurgy, for example, and formulation and compounding and the various arts and sciences, but they also brought some illegal knowledge with them, particularly mental knowledge.
And drugs?
And pharmakeia, you know, the old idea of sorcery.
Now, there is a book called Beyond Einstein, written by Michio Kaku, and he talks about a cat trapped in a box. I'm not sure we'll be able to get to the entire thing, but let's start talking about that, Gary, and maybe we'll finish it after the break.
And we can do that. Jared, what happens when physicists begin to probe for this transdimensional knowledge? They come to a place where they can't explain what's going on. And Dr. Schrodinger, back in 1935, brilliant physicist, said, it's like a cat trapped in a box with a bottle of poison gas. And you can't peek inside the box. Somebody asks you, is that cat dead or alive? And you can't tell. And then you say, well, you know, there's a Geiger counter connected to that little bottle of poison gas, and if we bring some uranium close to that box, it'll trip the Geiger counter, break the bottle, and the cat will die. Well, in order for you to know whether the cat's dead or alive, you have to know at a subatomic level how that uranium is going to emit energy, and it's impossible mathematically to know. And on that basis, you have to say the cat is both dead and alive at the same time. Now, that just doesn't make sense, but that's modern physics for you.
That was 1935.
Yes.
And since then, they've done a lot with nuclear force, haven't
Oh,
they?
yes.
Well, we'll talk about that again when we come back in just a moment. We were talking about a cat in a box and how this nuclear force was able to break the vial and kill the cat. Now, Gary, what is that talking about?
That's talking about quantum physics. Quantum physics, to make it very, very simple, is the physics that deals with particles even tinier than atomic particles, even tinier than the subparticles, the smallest thing you can imagine. And when you get down to that level of observation, that is the level of quantum physics, it's no longer possible to predict what's going on in terms of whether something will pop left or right or up or down, and therefore you're dealing with almost a spooky region. The National Institute of Science and Technology has recently published the results of an experiment which they called a cat state experiment. That's Schrodinger's cat. In which they had 6 beryllium ions, very tiny pieces of material. And these ions were spinning in both directions at the same time. Now, you can't imagine that, I can't either. But scientists say that those were in a cat state, quote unquote. They're spinning in opposite directions at the same time. Now, when tripped by a laser, if one of these 6 ions is touched by a laser beam, it reverses its direction, or it assumes a known direction. And the other 5 ions immediately begin to rotate in that same direction without being connected to the first one. What caused the others to fall in line? The thing that caused it is an unknown force at a subatomic level. And the scientists are seeking to understand this force because, JR, here's the key. If you take those ions and separate them, put them on opposite sides of the universe, trip one of them with a laser, the others will automatically follow suit instantly, even though they're separated by millions of light years. What's going on? It's called the quantum cat state. And the scientists say if we can master the use of that state and the forces involved, we can penetrate the dimensional veil. That's what this is all about.
Now, in Star Trek,
Yes.
They could speak, though billions and gazillions of light years away from
Right.
Earth, they could speak to those on Earth,
Sure.
the general or whoever it was running the program, through a subspace and instantly talk. So they didn't have to, their transmitters didn't have to be powerful enough to make it all that distance, and they could do it instantly. This is what you're talking about.
Exactly. They called it, when Kirk and Spock and Scotty and all the rest talked to people light years away without any delay whatsoever. They called that subspace radio. Well, essentially they were talking about this idea that there is a force that lies just on the other side of the veil, and it's eternal and everywhere at the same time. If person A taps into the force and person B 700 light years away taps into the force, they are instantly occupying the same time space. There's no time gap between them.
Now, you've got to understand that this is real. There is a subspace, for lack of a better term. Cleve Baxter, for example, back in 1966, took a polygraph machine and he hooked it up to some plants, and he found that they could communicate. He also found, for example, by taking a little bit of extraction from inside a man's tooth, he was able to measure that man's emotions, whether he be in the next room or across town or 300 miles away.
Right.
And there was some kind of a connection there.
Yeah, he discovered that if you connected a lie detector to a plant leaf and you disturbed the plant, it would show a reaction on the lie detector. Yeah, and if you disturb the leaf on an adjacent plant, the first plant would still show disturbance. Take that plant into the next room and disturb it, and you'd still get a reaction at the same instant. Take that plant across town and disturb it, you'd still get a reaction. And he said, there's something going on beneath the zone of everyday reality that we don't understand. It's been called clairvoyance, it's been called parapsychology, it's been called ESP, it's been called quantum physics. The Bible refers to it, JR, as the knowledge of heaven. As Satan put it, your eyes shall be opened and you shall be as gods. You'll be able to see that state that exists just beyond the veil.
Forbidden knowledge.
Forbidden knowledge.
You know, Gary, this idea that there is an indefinable force, cannot define it,
yes,
cannot quite understand it, but it's out there somehow, some way. God originally put a veil over us that we would not be able to penetrate and see that force. There are times throughout the Scriptures when certain men had visions,
yes,
saw angels, conversed with God. These are opportunities, shall we say, when those men went beyond this realm of existence and penetrated to see this knowledge.
Well, of course, Enoch is a perfect example. He walked with God. God took him. It is as though he just walked into heaven through this dimensional veil. Elijah was lifted physically into heaven. Paul said, I knew a man about 14 years ago, and he was taken up into the third heaven. And Paul said, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell. But here's the thing, JR. Paul said, I saw and heard things while I was up there that it's not legal for a man to speak about. That's that forbidden knowledge. One day, by faith, we're going to have that knowledge through Jesus Christ. Scientists want it right now. God says, Isaiah 55, 8 and 9, for my thoughts are not as your thoughts, neither your ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. This is that separation. We are not supposed to pierce the veil into the realm of God but in our own strength, but rather through faith. We are creatures of faith in the Lord Jesus Christ.
In God's own good time, He's going to bring us into this knowledge. I think we are destined for this knowledge, don't you?
Yes, we are.
He wanted us, however, in this world, not to have access to that knowledge because He wants us to be able to make our decision between right and wrong, good and evil, for God and against Satan by faith. He wanted us without being able to physically see beyond this realm. He wanted us to be able to make a decision. And otherwise, it wouldn't be by faith, would it?
No, it has to be by faith. And Jared, this goes back to the days after the flood, when the men said, let's build a tower that'll reach all the way to heaven. Well, you can't build a tower high enough to reach to heaven, and yet they had some kind of idea that they could get there. And God looked down, and the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. They were seeking that forbidden knowledge of heaven in their own strength, and God acted to stop them. It is not for us on earth to seek that knowledge. And yet today, modern quantum physics is probing deftly at the veil, trying to get through, and they're almost there. They're almost there.
Wow. Well, listen, when the children of Israel went through the wilderness, there was a Shekinah glory pillar of fire by night, cloud by day, that guided those people and provided manna dropping out of nowhere onto the ground for them to eat each morning. And when Moses spoke to the rock, or struck the rock, From nowhere, from rock, came water, rivers
Yes.
of it. Where did it come from? Well, there is something beyond our realm that can be opened up and enter into this realm. And one of these days we'll be there. But we must go through Jesus Christ. He's the only one who can lead us there. We'll be back in just a moment. The universe is a copy of the original. Before God spoke the worlds into existence, before what scientists call the Big Bang, Gary, there was a real world, a real universe, and everything truly physical.
And JR will understand the reality of it. As I conclude this article, I write, the bizarre paradoxes of creation are peacefully reconciled in the person of Jesus Christ. He is the underlying force who can only be perceived in the act of faith. He is the word of creation. He is love.
Mm-hmm. Love. There's more to that word than we could possibly comprehend.
Oh, yes.
If you don't know Christ as your personal Savior, trust Him today, then you'll be prepared for that future knowledge, and it'll make your head spin. This is J.R. Church and Gary Sturman. Until next time, keep looking up.